So looking at day 7, so there's no official chapter on this, by the way, and unfortunately your NASM textbook doesn't actually break down each of these joints individually. That's the one thing about the standard NASM text is it kind of gives you a broad overview of kinesiology, but it doesn't necessarily like actually teach you anything about these specific joint actions. So that's what we're doing. We're going far beyond what is sort of required in your regular NASM, but hopefully it gives you a deeper understanding of how the body moves or how these specific joint moves. So introducing the foot and ankle complex, right? So we are going to see 19, or I'm sorry, we're going to see 26 bones here in the foot and ankle complex, right? I mean, like all of these little, like your digits, right? And then you've got like your metatarsals right here, which are kind of making up the bridge of your foot. And then you get all these like little cuboid bones here, like all these little like flat, these little short bones that are like all coming together to make up this like, you know, very mobile but very like stable surface. And then you've got your tibia and your fibula coming down here and attaching the whole thing to the rest of your body, right? So 26 bones in the foot and ankle complex, some of the most bones you've got. 19 large muscles. So you got a whole bunch of like really big muscles that are doing pretty big jobs. And then a lot of little tiny intrinsic muscles, little tiny muscles that might just be, you know, wrapping around like a single toe. And then we see more than 100 ligaments, which is, you know, a ton of ligaments. Because you think about like how many joints there are, right? Like a joint is where two bones are meeting. Well, this bone right here is meeting 1, 2, 3 different places, right? But then this one's over here is meeting in 4 different places. So you've got a lot of different like connections in there, and we have to have like you know, we have to anchor them all down using like our ligaments, and that's often where we see a lot of problems. Like we're going to talk about ankle sprains today and how, you know, that's basically a tear in specific ligaments. And so this whole complex of all these bones is responsible for like supporting your body. Like it's your foundation for literally everything that you do, but it's also in charge of propelling your body. Like it moves you forward. You know, we talked about like what an advantage second class levers have, right? And so like that's a really good example of what we see here. It's sort of the wheelbarrow situation. It makes it very easy for us to kind of propel ourselves forward by creating that plantar flexion. So, you know, it's great. It's a really cool area. By the way, 26 large bones. When I was a kid, I jumped out of a tree wearing a Batman costume and broke 22 of these. Broke 22 of them all in one go. You know, if I had a Superman costume, it would have been fun. He can fly. So anyway, we're going to see a lot of like common foot ailments here. Broken bones could cause some of them. We'll also see like poor foot mechanics, and that's honestly probably the big one we're going to look at, right? We see a lot of like poor foot and ankle mechanics where somebody, again, excessively everts or excessively inverts. I mean, that's a little bit more rare, but sometimes you'll see that. You know, you'll see external rotation, or you'll just see like a fallen arch. So there's really no substitute when we're looking at the foot and ankle complex for, you know, proper development of your foot. And honestly, this is an area that often gets overlooked. I mean, we don't spend a lot of time, like people don't spend a lot of time like working on their foot and ankle complex, but it's your foundation for everything. It's some of the most important muscles you've got in your entire body. I mean, whenever I'm analyzing somebody's posture, the first place I go is their foot and ankle complex. It's the very first thing I glance at. So, you know, we see a lot of problems that arise when the foot is too rigid and it doesn't pronate the way it's supposed to. So we are, you know, we're supposed to be able to pronate our foot, right? You know, that's the idea actually. But we are not supposed to stay in pronation as we go through like a full step. If your foot's remaining in that pronation, that's showing that like there's weakness in certain muscles that are sort of controlling that foot. So we start to see a lot of problems that arise from that. You know, that's when we look at like overpronation during like a running gait, for instance. Let's see if I can find a, you know, a good example here.
Of side.
You gonna slow it down? Yeah, slow-mo version. Yeah, there we go, slow-mo version. Pause that, and then I'll make it even slower. So you can see this is sort of our normal pronation here, right? What we're seeing is like, see how he's in external rotation. There's actually nothing wrong with that at first, but the real problem is, see how now there's this downward angle as he's transferring from like foot in front of the body to foot, directly into the body, and it's about to go into extension where it'll be behind the body, right? You can see like as he's transferring from one spot to the other, he's falling on this inside section here, right? That ankle is sort of falling inward. And so you can see the same thing here, like it's laying, that's not bad. And then, okay, as we're transferring through, it stays in pronation, right? So I'm not saying pronation is a bad movement in general. Your body wouldn't make it if it was a bad movement in general. We need to be able to pronate. But what we often struggle with is that we spend our time over pronating. We're moving through pronation the entire time. You can kind of see this, right? Like it's going to be a landing and then they're going to fall inward, right? Land, and then there it is, falls inward. Luckily, these shoes actually make it a little easy. Look at that little black line. Right? It's like 90 degrees and now it's rotating inward, right? Or at least it was actually, I guess it was kind of angled this way and then it went back to 90, but this one's falling inward. So they're definitely pronating more on their left than they are on their right, which is another kind of interesting thing to kind of pay attention to. So, what that's going to lead to is a much more rigid foot, something that's not very mobile. And it can lead to, specific problems. It's going to lead to tightness, and that tightness is going to lead to like movement compensations, So we definitely see a lot of problems there in both walking and running. Oh, excuse me. Walking, by the way, by definition is when you're, moving from foot to foot, but one foot is always in contact with the ground. Whereas running, there is a point during a run where both feet are off the ground. So that's, if you've ever wondered what the distinction between walking and running is, it has nothing to do with the speed. It's, walking is there's always one foot in contact with the ground. Actually, really quick, I'll show you a good example of that. This is I'm kind of sidetracked here, but speed walking. If you've ever seen Olympic speed walking, it is one of the silliest freaking things. When you look at it, it's very silly looking. But they have to always keep one foot in contact with the ground. There's referees during like Olympic speed walking races, and those referees are basically looking at people's feet to see if there's ever a moment where where both feet are off the ground. There needs to always at least be contact with one.
Is that actually a thing?
What's that?
Is that actually a thing in the Olympics?
Oh yeah, and if you think that's surprising already, wait till you hear how fast they go. So it's already pretty, a pretty goofy looking thing. Like watch this. This is gonna be very silly looking.
Would become the Olympic creed.
All right.
The important thing in life is not the triumph.
Here we go. It looks like a bunch of people who are like, trying to get to the bathroom, but they're trying to be dignified.
1 mile, and the best go at less than 7 minutes a mile. 7 minutes. It's hypnotic and very,
and it kind of looks like they're running, but they're not. There's always at least 1 foot in contact with the ground. That is speed walking, and it's kind of funny because they do this like hip thing.
We do know why they're walking like that.
It's a very, what's that?
It looks pretty quick.
Yeah, it's just really quick, right? I mean, they're walking a 7-minute mile, like,
Yeah.
and they're doing it over like 50 kilometers. That's like, what is that? That's 22 miles. So pretty impressive stuff, when you really think about it. And they got a whole like mechanical action they do. You'll actually see, this is kind of a breakdown of it. You'll actually look at their hips. They do this weird hip twist, and they do that on purpose because that allows them to keep their leg in contact with the ground before they get their other one down. Personally, I think it's got to be absolutely horrible for you. Like when I look at this, like biomechanically, I'm like, that has just got to be so bad for your back and lead to so many problems.
230.
You
don't know 230.
But it's pretty fascinating stuff when you look at like what their angle is like.
This, then another has to be on the ground, or at least phenomenon. Yeah, walkers can trick the judges for about 40 milliseconds. So when you're running,
that weird sort of hip hike.
It
It almost looks like a sexy walk. Like do, like but yeah, anyway, speed walking's crazy, and I had to show you that just because that is a really good way to kind of see the difference. That's the difference between walking and running. There's always one foot in contact with the ground, but I've got clients who can't run a 7-minute mile. So there's actually, sorry, one more, like just a little distracted my brain thing. If anybody's ever watched the show Malcolm in the Middle, there's an episode where the dad gets really into speed walking and he like makes himself like an aerodynamic helmet.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I loved watching that show when I was a kid. Like,
it's like that one like red one piece or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a onesie. All right. Anyway, so let's look at. We're gonna start each of these lessons. We're gonna start each section by looking at the we call it epidemiology of whatever joint we're talking about. So we're basically gonna spend a little bit of time looking at like some of the common injuries associated with what we're looking at. So first one on top. Very common. I'm sure most people in this call have experienced this at some point in their life. We've got ankle sprains. So an ankle sprain involves the stretching or the tearing of one or more ligaments inside the ankle complex. So there's a lot of different versions of ankle sprains, and they are extremely common. This is the number one sports-related injury. Like in terms of sports injuries that you're going to see, yeah, there's ACL tears, and those are really severe, and there's rotator cuff problems and low back strains and things like that. All the stuff you hear about, that's taking your favorite ball player out of the game. Like you hear about those injuries all the time, but the number one most common that we are often going to see is ankle sprains. It happens in youths, it happens in adults, it happens in everybody. And here's why that, and what's the big deal when you think about like what an ankle sprain is, right? Let's take a look, if we just let's get a random picture here. We're going to see like, here's the lateral ankle sprain. And lateral ankle sprain, this is the most common of all ankle sprains. And that is where basically someone will tear this ATL ligament right here. And that's your anterior talofibular ligament. Okay, and so like you'll see this, that's holding your fibula onto your talus here. It gets torn, basically you'll see it like right in there, right in here, right? That lateral movement is sort of the most common, right? And so then your ankle swells up. And if it's a minor tear, and that's the difference. We look at like grade 1 versus grade 2 sprains. Come on, hook me up with that's not really, there we go. So this is kind of the difference. This is going to show you in muscles, but this is true of ligaments as well. There's grade 1, 2, and 3. Grade 1 is where there's just damage in a ligament. So when you roll your ankle and you feel just like a little bit, right? That's probably a grade 1 sprain. A grade 2 sprain is a partial tear, where there's actually like physical damage. So now some of the fibers are not connected. And then a grade 3 is a complete tear of that ligament. And so you'll see where people will grade 3 tear these things, or they'll maybe have like a grade 1 tear and then they don't take time to get off of their foot. They don't take time to get off their foot and ankle complex, and then it gets worse. So that's a really common one. This is one of the reasons why I have a little bit of I have a love-hate relationship with like high school football in particular, but high school sports sometimes, because it's like there's a couple things that I think are great, like it's team building and it builds skills and develops self-efficacy and puts emphasis on being active as like a healthy lifestyle, which I'm a big fan of, and football's fun, but high school football, you're taking high school students who are emotionally immature individuals, like they're youths, right? And you're asking them to commit to this team, and they might get hurt, and then they don't listen to their bodies because they want to continue participating in their sport, and so and then the coaches often encourage that. They're like, it's like, yeah, I kind of hurt my ankle on that play. And it's like, rub some dirt in it and get back on the field. It's like, yeah, okay. And it's like, no, like it screws you up into adulthood, because these ankle injuries, right? Here's where this is really a big problem. I mean, obviously, like it could, if it's really severe, it could cause, you might need surgery down the line, which we've definitely experienced. And one of the other things that we'll see is ankle sprains have been shown to decrease the neural drive to the gluteus medius and the gluteus maximus on the same side of your body. So what ends up, sorry, I don't know what that was. What ends up happening is you'll see like less activation of gluteal muscles. And you've got two of them, right? You got your gluteus medius, which is on the side here, right? And that's in charge of like abduction. And then you've got your gluteus maximus, which is in charge of hip extension and hip external rotation. So hip extension, right? The thing that's propelling you forward during a walk or during a run, it's certainly propelling you during like a squat, right? That gets really weakened. That muscle doesn't know to contract, because you spend all your time, like when you're sprained on your ankle, you walk on it very gingerly. You're limping, right? Which is you take a step with your right leg and then kind of just pass over to your left. And so now I'm not putting any weight on my right leg anymore. I'm putting all my weight in my left. So now I'm starting to develop like a muscle imbalance between like my one side of my glute and my other. And that can cause all kinds of other problems. It can travel up the kinetic chain. When I was in school, the article that the person who taught me kinesiology wrote for their masters that we all had to read was about how ankle sprains can lead to rotator cuff tears in the opposite arm. So like a left ankle sprain can lead to a rotator cuff tear in 20 years. And it was a pretty interesting thesis, when you think about it, because it's like it travels from the ankle, starts causing knee problems up to the hip. And then usually when we see something cross from legs to upper body, it often switches sides, because what will happen is you kind of collapse over here. So then your upper body, sort of tilts over there. And so that ended up leads to this sort of scoliosis thing. And then that ended up causing someone to basically excessively elevate this shoulder. Now that shoulder is more immobile. And so when you try to do a rotator cuff move, all of a sudden you tear your rotator cuff, So again, this is why kinesiology is so important. I mean, we're looking at it and it's like, these are the things we don't tend to think about. It's like, yeah, I hurt my ankle, I'm going to walk it off, but the more intense that injury is, the more it could lead to, permanent damage. So ankle sprains, very, very common. The most common, like I said, is going to be lateral ankle sprains. That's the ATL ligament, your anterior talofibular ligament. Sometimes you'll also see your calcaneofibular ligament. Actually, I should probably get that. ATL. Actually, this is great. So you can see, right, there's your calcaneofibular, right, running this way, and then there's your anterior, that's your ATL, anterior talofibular. So that's your talus. Your talus is this is sort of the main bone. When you look at it, this is your talus right here. It's this weirdly shaped bone that your tibia sits on top of. And that's where all the rotating actually happens, along the talus and the tibia. But see, there's a connection between the talus and the fibula as well, right? There's a connection between this bone, and this bone. And so we have to have a ligament that attaches all of them. You can see all the various ligaments here, right? And there's other ones, right? Obviously, sometimes you'll drop something on your foot, and or you'll just move a certain way. Sometimes you'll get a little tiny bruise on top. It could be because you tore one of these small little ligaments up here. That can lead to your foot being more rigid, and would be considered sort of a sprained ligament, just like anything else. And then there's your, you can see there's your plantar fascia, and then that's becoming like that's more of a tendon right there. But all of these are these big ligaments that we're talking about that are sort of attaching our bones together, right, and creating this stability, right? So most common is going to be those two, like the ATL. Occasionally, and like I said, lateral ankle sprains, the most common sports-related injury, that rolling the ankle to the outside. The other one we'll see is a high ankle sprain. This is a little bit more rare, but you'll sometimes see it. That's your anterior inferior tibiofibular, which actually, we're not actually seeing a picture of that right here. That's the talofibular. I need the tibular fibular. High ankle sprain. I need a front picture. There we go. So that's this ligament right here. So I guess a little bit more on the inside, right? But here on the front. So that can also get sprained sometimes. It's a little bit more rare. Usually high ankle sprains happen. Well, actually, I got a lot of like ex-military who have like high ankle sprains. Sometimes it happens from wearing like a really rigid like combat boot, and then like twisting your ankle in a specific way, and then it causes it to kind of be stuck. So then something's got to give, and you get this big tibia bone that's moving, and so it tears that ligament. Or you'll see it where, so like in football, where someone will get tackled and they'll wrap somebody else, and then their foot is like wrapped up, and then like immobile and then moving, and then all of a sudden they tear that ligament. So the lateral ankle sprain, by the way, and I put this note up here, just why it happens, right? It happens due to excessive inversion, and that leads to an overstretching of that ligament. So when we look at like inversion ankle sprain, this is what's happening, right? They are doing, remember, inversion is showing the bottom of your foot towards your midline, eversion showing it the other way. This person basically rolled their ankle. And so that overstretched that ATL ligament, right? Or their calcaneofibular ligament. They're one of these two ligaments right here. They overstretched them. Now, how did that actually happen? Like, why weren't they able to just kind of move through this range of motion? Well, probably because they excessively everted going into this. Like, let's look at like, what if somebody, you can see, and sometimes you'll see the medial sprain. Like I said, it's a little more rare. It's a little more rare, the eversion sprain, but it can happen. But when let's say you got a client who's everting, like they're in this pronation. This is their neutral posture. This ligament on this side, that lateral ligament, is now no longer used to being stretched out. So again, you're ending up with an overactive, underactive situation, not so much in a muscle, but in your connective tissue. And so what ends up happening is, you spend all your time in this position, this ligament spends all its time in this position, and it's supposed to be able to stretch out to here, but it just never has to. And then all of a sudden, one day you roll your ankle and you try to stretch it, and it's like, I can't stretch. I lost that ability a long time, and then it tears. So that is what we're going to see there. That's what causes these sprains to happen. A lot of times it's poor neutral posture, Another one that we're going to see that's very common, we've got plantar fasciitis. So plantar fasciitis, this is another very, very common foot and ankle injury. A lot of times you'll hear people describe this as like a stabbing sensation at their heel. What it is it's this plantar fascia, which is this webbing on the bottom of your foot, that gets really, 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 really tight. And this is meant to wrap up. This is meant to wrap up and around the leg, and then become your Achilles tendon before becoming like your calf muscles. That's your plantar fascia there. And so this can get really, really, really tight, Let's take a look at the plantar fascia. And when it gets too tight, now it's not so much a ligament problem. It's a soft tissue problem. It's connective tissue. It's it's your fascia, but it gets really tight and pulls down, and that's going to lead to your foot again being more rigid, right? And that sucks. Like it's really painful, So that's sort of a plantar fasciitis there. A lot of times this comes due to like weakness, where like basically the bottom of your foot spent so much time doing all of the work that the rest of your muscles like weren't doing anything. So your plantar fascia just got overworked. It just ended up taking too much of the brunt of physical activity. And it's a pain in the butt to fix because like the fix for it with any fasciitis or any itis, by the way, itis, just to give you guys a heads up, anytime you see the word itis, it's the prefix that means inflammation. Or apathy, right? Pathy means like it's like a condition. So you're going to see like different types of tendinitis or tendinopathies. Tendinitis is and tendinopathies are inflammations of tendons, right? So plantar fasciitis is inflammation of your plantar fascia. And by the way, it's usually worse in the morning. Or if your client like sits down for a little while, you'll hear people describe it as like when they sit down and their foot kind of cools off. That's actually where it gets problem because then it tightens. When it's nice and warm because they're doing a lot of walking, it's actually nice and loose. But then when they relax, it tightens it all back up afterwards. We're also going to see Achilles tendinopathy, which is, again, like inflammation in the Achilles tendon, right? That plantar fascia is wrapping around. These two often kind of go hand in hand. We'll see a lot of fasciitis people also struggle with tendinopathy. But that's inflammation of this tendon back here. They'll get heel pain. They'll get tenderness, things like that. And then we'll see another common injury, and this one, you don't think of it as an injury, you think of it just kind of sort of soreness sometimes, but it is an injury, is medial tibial stress syndrome, much more commonly referred to as shin splints. I'm willing to bet most people in this call have had some version of shin splints at some point. Pretty common problem to deal with, especially people who start running, and basically what that is you've got your tibia here with these two, like, you get your anterior and posterior tibialis muscles that are supposed to be there to like, do reduce some of the force, like they're meant to work with your calf muscles. But if you've got some muscles that are, working really hard and other muscles that are not working enough, well, then you end up having like more impact on these bones. And so if you're running, that tibia, you're just creating like it's, it's like taking a hammer and just like working your way up the shin a little bit. You're not hitting it hard to break it, but you're creating like little tiny microfractures, all that impact slowly over time. And, that causes these little tiny itty bitty microscopic fractures on the surface of your shin bones. And it hurts, fractures are painful. So pretty common stuff there. Any questions or comments about any of these conditions? Anybody struggling with plantar fasciitis or, coming back from an ankle problem?
No, all good.
All right, fair enough. All right, so let's go ahead and label out these bones. Now we kind of talked about like, why are we spending all this time talking about stuff? We're doing it so we can understand like our movements, right? So looking at our bones here, right, the anatomy, like I said, you get 26 bones here. I don't need you to have them all memorized, thank goodness. But I would like you to be kind of familiar with the different groups, right? So this A group right here, right, this first line, those are going to be your digits, right? Those are your toes, right? So you can see we refer to these as your phalanges. Anybody's a fan of the show Friends, right? What's her name? Phalange. So there's like, these are your phalanges, right? Just like on your fingers, your digits, those are your phalanges, right? And then you have got your metatarsals, and your metatarsals are making up the bridge of your foot. So the most of the length of your foot, right? Where that plantar fascia is kind of stretching across, right? That is your metatarsals. And then you can see here, these are kind of getting their own sort of labeling, right? This line right here. Those are your cuboid bones. These are we refer to them just as your tarsals, right? So this whole complex right here are the various different types of tarsals that you have. So you have your tarsals in the ankle, the metatarsals in the bridge of the foot, and the phalanges that are making up the digits, right? And so we can kind of see that right here, all these little bits. And then at the top, we've got your tibia, which is this big, your big shin bone, and your fibula, which is running down to the side. So the two separate bones down here in the ankle complex. And then this one right here, this F bone right here, actually two that we'll spend a little bit of extra time talking about. We'll talk about like this one right here. So this is your talus. Your talus is actually really responsible for allowing like the navigation of how your tibia moves. We look at like, let's see if I can find a tibio-talar joint movement. GIF. Can I get a GIF? Ooh, I can. All right. Cool. So this picture, this is kind of cool because, oh wait, I guess it is a YouTube video. Gotcha. So you actually see like, here's how the ankle's kind of moving along this bone. Come on, baby. Play the, move the ankle. There we go. So you can see it kind of rotate like that, right? But it is designed to do a little bit of lateral movement as well, which we'll see in just a second. It is designed to do a little bit, just a little bit of like rotational movement as well. So this does flexion and extension here, but it can also do a little bit of like eversion and inversion, and it can do a little bit of external and internal rotation. It's not supposed to do that. And then we see this joint here as well, right? The tibiofibular, right? These two have to interact with each other. So this talus bone is interacting with both of these individual bones, right? It's interacting with both of these separately. So it creates this hinging action as well as a little bit of like rotational movements, Let's see here. I want to see if they can start rotating. Show me some eversion. Show me some inversion. Oh yeah, here we go. At the very end. So here we go, like, a little bit of pronation, supination, right? That eversion, inversion while we're also sort of rotating. A little bit of rotation plus eversion. There you go. You got pronation, right? So we can kind of see here this lateral movement side to side. It's not much. It's really subtle, There's really not as much movement side to side as there is like front to back. So, that's how your ankle's supposed to move. So that talus is what allows that to happen. And then another one that we do spend a lot of time talking about that's hard to see in this picture, but that's your actual heel bone. That's your calcaneus, right? So your calcaneus is this big freaking heel bone right here, and it's meant, this is where your Achilles tendon's kind of wrapping around and becomes your plantar fascia right here. So, there's definitely dysfunction in that as well. So those are the bones that we're going to be talking about. So now we are going to move into our muscles. We're going to look into the key muscles associated with our foot and ankle complex. But before we do, and if you forget everything I tell you today, if you're not paying attention or, it's too much to cram in there, then I want you to pay most attention to what I'm about to say. This concept right here is what's going to help you for the, understanding the rest of all of your kinesiology and all of your movements. And that is knowing the difference. Your muscles are all going to have an isolated function, and they are all going to have an integrated function. And what that means is it's what a muscle does. So the isolated function is what the muscle does concentrically. This is what we think, again, like we think of, when we're thinking of like a muscular contraction, right? Most people are thinking of concentric, right? Like a lot of people, like when I think contract, we know there's 3 types of contractions, right? But when I think of like contracting my bicep, I think of shortening it. I think of concentrically moving it. Technically, it's contracting when I'm lengthening my arm as well, but I don't, we don't usually sort of associate it with that, right? We kind of jump to the concentric. So this is sort of the main thing that this muscle does. We're looking at when it's pulling concentrically, right? It's what the muscle does when it's shortening. And then obviously it can just hold position, which would be integrated, and it can lengthen. It can do the opposite of shortening, which is its other integrated function. So the isolated function of a muscle, this is much more commonly referred to as the action of a muscle. So when you say like, the bicep muscle's action, like what does it do, right? What is my bicep responsible for, right? Well, it's responsible for elbow flexion, because when it concentrically contracts, it creates elbow movement in the sagittal plane where the angle decreases, elbow flexion, right? So that's when we're gonna be looking at all of our muscles, and we're gonna look at the isolated function, which is its concentric action, and we're gonna look at its integrated function, which is its eccentric and isometric actions. Okay, it's what they're responsible for there. So knowing the relationship between what one muscle does concentrically and what the other muscle, its antagonist, is doing eccentrically is really important if we are going to be looking at those length tension relationships that I always spend time talking on, right? We look at a length tension relationship, right? We want our muscle to be at the proper length so that it can produce as much force as possible. Overshortened, weak muscle. Medium overshortened, still weak muscle, right? Moderately lengthened out, optimal resting length, that's a strong muscle fiber, right? But then over here, we see like overly lengthened, that's not good either. And overly lengthened, that's not good, right? So we want a muscle to have a good length tension relationship. And that's going to lead to us not having to deal with muscle imbalances, right? Yeah, that's not, no Google. That's definitely not what I'm looking for. Muscle imbalance, joint. There we go. There, this is one. So we see pictures like this, like we think about like this is, so if we think about like what's happening in a muscle balance, right? What's happening on this shortened side here, this bunched up fat muscle, right? Versus this like long, skinny, overstretched muscle. This muscle is concentrically contracting too much, and this muscle is concentrically contracting not enough. This muscle doesn't want to eccentrically contract. This muscle only eccentrically contracts. So that's why we have overactive on one side and underactive on the other. So what's nice about studying this is you're going to know the isolated function of a muscle. And that's what I tell you guys. What I want you to memorize, like if you're spending time trying to memorize every factoid about every single muscle, like what its origin is, what its insertion is, if you're trying to understand like what all of its functions are, that's great, but it's also a lot. So what I recommend is that you spend your time learning each muscle's isolated function. Learn what that muscle does concentrically first. Once you have a pretty good understanding of how all of your muscles work concentrically, then you can start working on like what the integrated functions are. So again, let's look at my bicep, right? My bicep concentrically accelerates elbow flexion. That's its isolated function. That's what I want you to memorize first. Then when you're like, okay, well now I know the integrated function is the opposite. So we would say not concentric, we would say eccentric because that's the opposite. And we wouldn't say elbow flexion, we would say elbow extension. And we wouldn't say it's accelerating because accelerating is concentric. And we would say decelerating because decelerating is eccentric. So the isolated function is concentrically accelerates elbow flexion. And the integrated function would be eccentrically decelerates elbow extension. And that's everything that my bicep does. And then isometrically stabilizes the elbow joint. Charlie, you got a question? Charlie? Nope. Oh, okay. So those are your isolated functions, right? So we're going to be going over all the isolated functions of all of our muscles, and we're also going to be looking at the integrated functions. And you're going to notice that isolated versus integrated, they're the same sentence, they're just flipped. They're just backwards. Whatever it does concentrically, during a shortening movement, it will do eccentrically during a lengthening movement. And what's funny about memorizing this is, guess what? Remember, every muscle in your body has an antagonist, right? So now I just got done saying concentrically accelerates elbow flexion, eccentrically decelerates elbow extension. Guess what? If I wanted to know what concentric action the antagonist does, I would go, okay, well, then if it's elbow flexion, then I need to look at elbow extension. What muscle concentrically accelerates elbow extension? That's going to be my triceps. And it eccentrically decelerates elbow flexion. So all of your muscles are, they're perfectly arranged to have an opposite muscle on the other side of the joint. So starting in the ankle complex is nice because like these are actually pretty simple joint actions. So looking at the muscles of our lower legs, these are the ones we got to look at. We are going to look at the anterior tibialis. We're going to look at the posterior tibialis. Those are the two muscles on the shin. We're going to look at the soleus versus the gastrocnemius. Those are the two muscles of the calf. And then we'll look at your peroneals, which are the little stabilizers that live on the side. That we don't spend a ton of time talking about, but are actually quite important. First one we're going to look at, anterior tibialis. So this muscle lives right on the front of the shin. It runs from the top of your tibia, and it runs down and it inserts. You'll see it actually wraps around this side and grabs onto your foot. So its job is to concentrically accelerate. And by the way, every isolated function, they're all going to start with this sentence. They're these two words, concentrically accelerates. It'll always say that, right? Because that's what a muscle's action is. It's whatever the muscle does concentrically. And we know that concentric contractions are accelerating, right? Whereas eccentric contractions are decelerating. I'm adding speed to something when I'm contracting my muscles away. So concentrically accelerates. And then we look at the joint. This is in our ankle. So the movement that it does is dorsiflexion, and it also does ankle inversion. So your anterior tibialis is responsible for these two things. It's responsible, you know what? Can I make my, how do I make my freaking thing bigger? I don't know how to do it. What if I go like this? That's slightly bigger. All right, we'll do this because you guys can probably see this a little. Your screen looks like mine right now, right? We see everybody's names. Is that what everybody's like screen looks like? Am I bigger on your screen right now than I was before?
I get. I don't know. What do you mean?
Do you still see my PowerPoint and my notes, or do you see what I'm looking at?
I see your PowerPoint and your note.
Right now.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that's how this worked.
Yeah.
I was hoping you guys could see what I'm seeing. Do you see me in the upper right-hand corner?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Okay. But you can't see what I'm looking at right now, which is like I've got everything covered up. I can just see your guys' like I can just see the six of us. Like crap, I didn't know that. Okay. All right. Well, then I can't really zoom in. All right. So here's dorsiflexion, right? So ankle dorsiflexion is if I pull my toe from here up like this. So my anterior tibialis is in charge of this action, me pulling my toe upward. It also does a little bit of ankle inversion. That's its other concentric movement. So it also rotates my ankle slightly inward like this, right? So that's our inversion. So that's the anterior tibialis, right? Those are the two main things it does, dorsiflexion and inversion. And again, a muscle's action is always concentrically does this, right? So now we look at the integrated function. The integrated function is the exact opposite. So instead of concentrically, it eccentrically. And instead of accelerating, it decelerates. And it's still like the ankle, so we're still in the ankle, but instead of dorsiflexion, this one's going to be plantar flexion, because again, it's the opposite. Instead of inversion, it's going to be eversion, right? And then integrative function will always isometrically stabilize whatever bones it's attached to. So this is attached to your ankle complex, so it will isometrically stabilize the foot and ankle complex, okay? So that's sort of what these look like. I wanted to kind of, this is what I did last time. Let's see, we got concentrically accelerates ankle plantar flexion. So, I always show people, like, I always like to show them, like, we've got like an agonist, right? And we'll put that in, right? I got agonist. And then we got an antagonist. Right, so these are opposites of each other. So if you look, if you literally just draw a line, right, and just flip them, right, concentrically becomes eccentrically, accelerates becomes decelerates, and then dorsey becomes plantar. They literally just flip around. That's what we're going to see in this agonist-antagonist relationship, right? So then what's kind of funny is you'll have like, okay, and now you know what muscle, you know, if you want to figure out like what the opposite muscle of your anterior tibialis is, all you got to look at is like what the action is, right? Look at what it does, integrated, version. And you go, okay, well, what muscle is going to concentrically, because if we're looking for a muscle's shortening action, right, it's always concentric. And we'd say like, what muscle concentrically accelerates ankle dorsiflexion, right? And so then that's how we flip things around. So here we go. Anterior tibialis accelerates dorsiflexion. It's pulling your ankle towards you, and inversion. The other one we're going to see here that's also a tibialis muscle is your posterior tib. That's your posterior tibialis, right? It concentrically accelerates plantar flexion and inversion of the foot. So this is where your posterior tibialis works with your anterior tibialis in terms of ankle inversion, but it works against your anterior tibialis in terms of plantar flexion. So the posterior tib, which is located, you know, on the posterior side, and it wraps around, right? You can see like this one starts on the anterior side, wraps around like this onto the medial side there. And then this one's wrapping from the back also onto the medial side. So both of these actually share a pretty common insertion. They both kind of grab the same spot of the ankle, right? But because of where they are located, they do different things. When this muscle when your anterior tibialis contracts, it pulls this way, which pulls your ankle upwards, right? But when your posterior tibialis contracts, it pulls this way, which actually pulls your foot downwards. That actually creates plantar flexion. But they both share a job in terms of inversion. That's why both of these muscles tend to be underactive in our clients who have like overpronation, because pronation is too much eversion. So both of these muscles, which are inverters, need to, they need to contract more. This is what we saw yesterday. For those of you who came to the morning session yesterday, and I guess it was Andres and Bay, when we looked at the ankle complex yesterday, right? We were talking about like, too much eversion of the foot, and we need to strengthen the anterior and posterior tibialis. And then the integrated function, right? The exact opposite. Eccentrically decelerates, and then not plantar flexion, but dorsiflexion, not inversion, but eversion. And then again, it'll always also say isometrically stabilizes and whatever muscle it is we're talking about. So those are the muscles in the sort of the shin muscles, right? But then we flip straight to the other side of the joint. We go right onto the back here, and we've got your soleus. Now, a lot of times you think of the soleus as just the lower fibers, but it does wrap the entire length of the leg here. It's covered up. You can't really see your soleus because it's covered by your gastrocnemius muscles up here. So it's kind of covering it. So you can't really see your soleus very well, But that concentrically accelerates plantar flexion. That one's easy, right? Like literally the only thing the soleus does is plantar flexion. So all it does is point your toe away. So this is my soleus working, right? Doing little calf raises. I'm working my soleus. Doesn't do anything other than that. That's its job, right? Integrative function is to decelerate eccentrically into dorsiflexion. So it decelerates when I go back down to the ground, right? It decelerates as I pull my toe towards me. And it isometrically stabilizes the foot just like before. So now we're starting to see the soleus and the anterior tibialis, right? If we think of that like muscle imbalance, right? If we think of like, if I take a look at this and kind of modify, we're going to modify this this chart that we pulled off the internet here, right? You think about like these muscles here, right? This one, actually, we'll just do this. Let's just do this. Let's say in most of our clients, right? Let's say this is the soleus. Right? And then on the opposite side of the joint, right? On the other side, that is our anterior tibialis. Anterior tib, or antib is what most people will say. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is a normal, healthy joint. It's got full range of motion in both directions. But what do we normally see? We often see this, right? We got the friggin' soleus way too tight, right? And we got this weakened anterior tibialis. So this is sort of where we are often stuck with our clients. Like this is what we're seeing. So now I know what I need to do, right? This immediately allows me to write a program where I go, okay, in that case, we need to stretch this guy. And we need to strengthen this guy. And now I know that like one person's program is going to look like compared to my other client, right? One client, they're an excessive, they're a foot turner outer, or they're an excessive pronator, right? And my other person, maybe they're an anterior pelvic tilt person. All right, well, two different problems, right? You're getting a bunch of hip stretches, you're getting a bunch of ankle stretches, right? Different programs for different folks. So this is the relationship we're kind of looking at here. So that's our soleus. The other big one, this is the sort of the one that we all think of when we think of our calves, right? And you can see there's not a big difference here. Like look at the pictures, you can see soleus starts, right down here. Gastrocnemius, though, it actually crosses over the joint, right? Your soleus, it's down here on the tibia and the fibula, right? But your gastrocnemius actually crosses over your joint. It actually works together with your hamstring muscle. You can see the tip of the hamstring muscles kind of coming down there, right? And grabbing. So your gastrocnemius has two separate sections of fibers, which we're not really seeing. It's just going to be labeled as your gastrocnemius. But sometimes you'll see, medial gastrocnemius, which is this side, sorry, medial gastrocnemius versus lateral gastrocnemius. And generally the lateral side tends to be a little overactive. But we got a little more watered down version here. We're just looking at the fact that the gastrocnemius accelerates plantar flexion. So it does the exact same thing, right? Isolated function of your soleus and your gastrocnemius is the same. They both concentrically accelerate ankle plantar flexion. They point your toe away. Like I said, there's also a little bit of like left to right fibers. Generally, the lateral fibers are the ones that get overactive, and that's what causes the foot to sort of externally rotate. So a lot of times when you're foam rolling and stuff, you'll place it on the outside portion of your calf, but it could be all of it. You could just need an overall calf massage. Integrated function, flip it, right? Instead of concentric, eccentric. Instead of accelerate, decelerate. Instead of ankle plantar flexion, ankle dorsiflexion. So again, like take a look at this, right? Like look at the let's look at the anterior tibialis versus we'll just say the soleus because they're easier to see on the same page. So look at the anterior tibialis. It concentrically accelerates dorsiflexion and ankle inversion. And look at the soleus's isolated function. Concentrically accelerates plantar flexion, right? So that's literally exactly the opposite. So then if you look at the integrated function of your anterior tib, eccentrically decelerates plantar flexion. That's what the soleus concentrically accelerates, right? That's how we know an agonist-antagonist relationship. We know that the isolated function of an agonist is the integrated function of its antagonist, right? Whatever Batman does concentrically, the Joker does eccentrically, and vice versa, right? Suddenly Joker's the good guy in the scenario, and it's concentrically accelerating, right? And Batman's the bad guy here. He's decelerating. So that's, again, looking at your agonists and your antagonists and looking at your muscle action spectrum. And lastly, the last big muscle we're going to talk about in the ankle complex. Now, I will say this is being listed as your peroneus longus, which is fine. We can, that is that's what's pictured here. But this is actually a lot of little tiny muscles called your peroneals or your peroneal group. This is something that this is where Nassim and I disagree a little bit. Like this is where they're kind of just presenting it as like, hey, the one you need to know is the peroneus longus. And it's like, there's some other peroneals in there. But if we're just going to lump them all together and call them the peroneals in general, they are little muscles that run along the fibula and grab on the bridge of the foot. And then they wrap actually, and I know you can barely see this, but they actually wrap over the bridge of the foot. So this is accelerating a little bit of plantar flexion, but honestly, not very much. But the big thing that it does is ankle eversion. This is another one of our bad guy muscles, right? Like this is another muscle that tends to get really overactive because it causes that excessive eversion. And remember, if you got a client who's just sitting in excessive eversion all the time, and then their ligament gets tight, all of a sudden they try to do just a little bit of inversion and they break that ligament, right? So your peroneals concentrically accelerate plantar flexion and eversion of the foot. Let's look at the peroneals here. So your peroneals, and there's lots of them, right? There's the peroneal brevis and longus and tertius and all these little tiny ones. But there they are. They're imagine this kind of group that all kind of works together. And then it starts here, and then it wraps over the top of the foot, which we're not seeing in this picture, but ooh, there we go. Look at that. So it kind of wraps all the way along. It looks like Scotch tape, right? It's so funny. Like it looks like, when the ankle was being designed, it's like, I don't know, hold that stuff there. Let's put a little tape down there. So there's your peroneals, right? They run along the side there. So then there's going to be a bridge right across the foot there. So that is your peroneals group. And it's, like I said, it's in charge of ankle eversion. When it pulls, it everts the foot. It shows the bottom of your foot towards the outside. So when we see excessive eversion versus inversion, when we see that in our clients, right? You got a client who just spends all day like this, right? These ligaments over here are getting tight. They're not getting used to stretched out. And then all of a sudden one day they roll their ankle and they put too much weight on the outside of their foot and bam, they tear that ligament right there. So therefore, bad guy muscle, muscle that's overly tight. We need to loosen this sucker up, right? We need to get it to stop accelerating eversion. We need to get it to decelerate inversion, right? And then we still want it to isometrically stabilize. So any questions so far, guys? Questions, comments, concerns? How are we feeling so far? I know it's like sometimes this is a little dry. This gets pretty darn dry.
Yeah, it's good.
You feeling all right?
Yeah, about my ankle, because I had an injury on my ankle too, actually. So
You rolled your ankle?
yeah, I rolled it, and then I couldn't walk for like about a day.
Yeah, man. Actually, let's do. You guys got the raise hand feature, right? Raise your hand here if you're on the call, if you've ever sprained your ankle. Let's see. How do I? Actually, don't even know how to do that. I don't know how to do it on my end. Yep. Yeah, look at it. Just the whole friggin' thing is lighting up. All right, lower your hand. Right, friggin' everybody. And then some people are just, keep raising your hand. Right, like, yeah, it's very, 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 very common. So let's look at the movements of the ankle. So again, just so you guys can get these memorized, your movements of the ankle complex, right? You've got dorsiflexion, which is movement of the top of the ankle, like towards the anterior tibialis, right? So you're pulling your toes towards your face, right? That's dorsiflexion. Probably one of the most important moves we can make. This is what a lot of people struggle with. Most of our clients don't do enough dorsiflexion, right? Let's take a look actually. Excessive plantar flexion. This is the opposite of dorsiflexion. Yeah, there we go. Good Lord. So you'll see this kind of thing. See how like this person's just kind of walking with all their weight kind of on the forward portion of their body, right? That's excessive plantar flexion. They're putting all their weight in their calf muscles rather than doing using their entire foot, right? Yeah, we can see it there, right? Very common. And it's just habits, right? These are just like habits that our clients sort of develop. Or you'll see this, right? This is a really, wow, that's a really big one. Literally walking, this person, they walk heel to toe there, but then toe to heel, right? So that's just the calf muscles working more and more and more and more. This is why, like my roommate, this is actually kind of a slightly messed up story. But I have a roommate who has Adonis calves. His calves look like freaking Arnold's. They're huge. He's not a big dude. He's big muscles though in the calves. And it's funny. He's a little bit of a germaphobe. He's not like germs, and so like until he gets his shoes on, he walks around on his tippy toes because that means there's less contact with the ground and less like germs, right? And he had to work as a kid. He had to like consciously tell himself. He had to be like walk heel to toe. It was something he had to practice as a child. What's up, Charlie? Question. So you raise your hand.
I was gonna ask why you call them Adonis calves.
Oh, Adonis is a famous, sorry. Yeah, that's not a muscle reference or anything. Adonis was a very famous Greek god. He was the male version of Aphrodite. Like he was the Greek god of attractiveness and beauty. So he was a very muscular, ripped up dude. So when you say someone's an Adonis, yeah, they're a muscular dude. Yeah. So that's it's just a silly joke, but yeah, I would say Adonis calves because he's got the most large muscle, attractive calf muscles. So yeah. So dorsiflexion, right? That's pulling your toes towards you. We don't see enough of this. We need our clients, right? We need our clients to practice dorsiflexion. So when you've got them doing let's say a single leg exercise, right? Don't let that no lazy ankles, right? Pull those toes up, right? Actively contract that anterior tibialis. Get better at that dorsiflexion while you're doing, bicep curls or something, right? Just pull that toe up as much as you can. And then we got plantar flexion, right? Which we also want to have movement here. I mean, don't get me wrong, we want plantar flexion. Look at how much friggin' plantar flexion that is. That's clearly this person's like a friggin' dancer, I don't have that much plantar flexion. And this is the sort of extension of the ankle, right? So we got flexion versus extension here, right? Sagittal plane movements. Then we got eversion, showing the bottom of your foot towards the outside, sort of rotating away, versus inversion, showing the bottom of your foot towards the inside section, right? So kind of hard to see here, but again, we get sort of inversion if I'm on the outsides of my ankles like this, right? Versus like eversion if I were like that. And notice how I literally cannot evert without caving my knees in. This is why we see what we talked about yesterday, right? We have pronation distortion syndrome. We see clients who kind of have this style of posture, right? We don't want to be here either. I'm not saying like you want to have a client like this. That's actually what we call knee varus, and that's not good either. But we want to be neutral, right? We want to kind of rest, right, with our knees pointing straight forward down to our second and third toe, toes forward, nice balance on the foot there. Next one we've got is toe flexion. These are the special ones that I didn't spend too much time. They don't really put in your books because we aren't really working with this type of injury. I mean, we kind of do. We'll talk about how to fix like turf toe and stuff. But you do have like toe flexion versus toe extension. This is another movement of the foot and ankle complex. So toe flexion would be curling your foot under, toe extension would be pulling it out. Your peroneals assist in these movements here as well. Now, here's the slightly complicated one, right? So eversion, turning the foot outward or away from the midline, inversion, turning the foot inward or towards the midline. Now, pronation and supination, they are not separate movements. They are a combination of these other movements happening simultaneously. So what pronation is, which we can see here, see how there's some eversion that's happening, but they are also putting all of the weight of their foot like back on their heels, right? So this is a combination of ankle dorsiflexion, so pulling the toes back towards you, and ankle eversion, and it's hard to see in this version, but a little bit of external rotation of the foot. Don't think of pronation. I mean, you just think of it as pronation. But it's your foot flattening, right? So when we see like excessive foot pronation, it looks like this. We see this poor alignment here, right? We see like the inside part of the foot is putting all the weights on the inside portion of the foot. I love this one right here. You can see like, this would be like a fallen arch situation, right? You see how like the, there we go. See how like this is like it's almost a straight line and then kind of curves out this way, right? And this one curves out this way. Whereas these are just like 90-degree straight lines. This isn't good either. I mean, like this is really rare though. You just don't often see high arches. And that's where you see like, too much arch, right? But you can see it, right? Like it's just all their weight is just pressing onto this inside portion right here in particular. We want to have, the bridge, we want to have the arch of our foot not making contact with the ground, but we also don't want too much of that, right? So that's pronation versus supination, right? Pronation is a combination of dorsiflexion, eversion, and external rotation, with the two bad ones being eversion and external rotation. Those are really our big problem children. And then you got supination, which is plantar flexion, inversion, internal rotation. This is also a problem if there's too much of this. But if your client's overly pronating, we need to work on getting them to supinate, just not too much, right? So that's, we looked at it, we said the muscles, and then we said what the joint actions are, right? And we talked about like which muscles are agonists in what scenarios. Well, now we're going to flip how we learn it. Now let's look at the joint action first, and then we will list all the muscles that are in that joint action. So again, what actions do we have at the ankle? We have dorsiflexion, we have plantar flexion, we have inversion, and we have eversion. Pronation and supination are there as well, but those are combos because so they would be putting, these other two things together. So they aren't really their own like joint action, right? So what muscles are responsible for dorsiflexion? That's going to be your anterior tib and your peroneal complex, okay? Then we see what muscles are in charge of plantar flexion. That's going to be your gastrocnemius, soleus, and a little bit of your posterior tibialis. So we can see like there's our ankle dorsiflexion, right? So anterior tib right here, right? We'll see the, this is called your extensor digitorum longus, which is one of the peroneals. That's actually running down. It's what allows you to pull your foot up. You're not going to see this one in your lists here. And then here's your one of your peroneals, right? Another one of your peroneals, actually, I should say. So remember I said earlier, I really don't like how NASM does peroneals. They just only do basically the peroneus longus, which does eversion. So here they've got it listed as like, yeah, it's your peroneals, but honestly, it's not the ones we're talking about. This peroneal grabs the top of your foot and pulls it up, right? And then this peroneal runs across and grabs like this toe here. This one actually does inversion, literally the opposite. So it kind of drives me a little crazy actually, but I get it. They're trying to keep keep it to the essentials. And honestly, we don't deal with the peroneals that often. They don't really come up that often, except for when they're overactive in that eversion. So they really only need to be listed when they cause problems, and they only cause problems when they're doing the eversion. So I don't know. It's on here. A part of me even wants to just like delete it and just keep this as your anterior tib. So then we've got ankle plantar flexion, total opposite, right? Gastrocnemius, soleus, and then your posterior tibialis does a little bit of this too, actually. And then all these little tiny intrinsic muscles. Like I said, you get to your plantaris, little tiny itty bitty muscle back there. These are all these like little itty bitty ones, but basically the big ones, gastrocnemius and soleus, and then posterior tibs are there to help a little bit. Then we've got inversion, ankle inversion. That's going to be your anterior and posterior tibialis. And again, ankle inversion is what we do not see enough of in a good portion of the people that we work with. So we need to strengthen both of these muscles for sure. This is what we practiced yesterday, right? Grabbing the resistance band, pulling your toe back towards you, or grabbing it from the outside and pulling it inward, right? That's going to work on that inversion and dorsiflexion, which we need more of. And then we see eversion. And really, you can see, again, here's the big peroneal group, right? There's your peroneus longus, there's your brevis, there's your tertius, and there is your extensor digitorum. So honestly, they're just label them all together. It's just your peroneals group. And they all grab the outside part of the ankle. So because they all grab the outside part of the ankle, it pulls upwards, right? You can literally think of it as, it's running right here along the side of my shin. So if I had a rope, tied here, and I pulled up, what would it do to my foot? It would rotate my foot like that. I need to go to pantomiming school. My brain wants to invert. It everts. It pulls the foot this way. I'm trying to in pantomimes to do that like rope stuff. Freaking hard to do. Then we got the toe stuff. I put this in here, but honestly, you don't need to worry about toe flexion or toe extension. But these are your flexor digitorums and your flexor hallucis, and then your extensor hallucis and your extensor digitorum, which are the opposites. And yeah, that's the foot and ankle complex. So I know, like I said, this gets a little dry, gets a little bit of memorizing, but I want to just show you really quickly how this actually applies, right? Think about like overhead squat solutions table. Let's say we're analyzing a client's squat, right? This is that little table that's in your textbooks. We're analyzing a client's squat and we see their feet turn out, or we see, actually, that's the only one we're going to see right now. So we'd say their feet turn out, right? So that means, like, when we say turning out, what does that mean? It means external rotation, and it means eversion of the foot. So our muscles that we're going to see here are the soleus and the lateral gastrocnemius. Those muscles are the overactive muscles. And we know they're the overactive muscles because external rotation is being caused because the foot wants to be in plantar flexion. And since it can't be in plantar flexion, it's got to find some other way to move. So it moves externally. So the soleus, which does plantar flexion, is on our overactive list. And the lateral gastrocnemius, which is on the other side, right? That's also doing plantar flexion. That's on the overactive list. Our underactive list, we need to go to the medial gastrocnemius. We need to pull it back to neutral. Right? And then we're going to see like, sometimes you'll see anterior tibialis and posterior tibialis on that list as well. Is that high quality? Yeah, that'll work. What if we see the foot flatten, right? What if we see like the foot just flatten down? That's eversion. So the peroneals, the lateral gastrocnemius, right? Meanwhile, underactive, anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis. So how this is what kind of leads me to not so much a lesson in kinesiology, but I'm assuming this thought has popped into everyone's head by this point. At some point, I'm assuming this thought is somewhere in your brain, which is, okay, so knowing these muscles is important. How many of these muscles do I need to memorize, right? At the end of the day, like, how many muscles do you need to have up in your noggin in order to, like, you know, train your clients effectively, right? Because I mentioned a lot of like little intrinsic ones, which, and honestly, guys, like, I don't have most of those rattling around up here anymore. You know, other stuff has come in and pushed that out. I used to know more muscles when I used to have to study this stuff all freaking day. But for the most part, like, what are the essential ones? The answer to that question is every muscle on this list. And it's not, you know, these aren't muscles. This is just these two columns right here. And there's a lot of repeating. So this may look like a lot, but it's not that many muscles. It's your soleus, your gastrocnemius, your muscles in the hamstrings, muscles in the hips, right? These are the muscles. The muscles we're going to talk about in class. And the other way to think of it is the muscles that are in your textbook. So you'll notice if you flip to the appendix of your textbook, you know, in that back section of the book there, you will see, hold on just a second. You will see all the muscles listed out kind of like this, just little pictures and then like what that muscle does, little picture and what that muscle does, right? Now, this right here is what I want you guys to have flashcards for. Let's see, how many, what do you got? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 60 muscles. 60 muscles, that's how many we have to have memorized. Sounds like a lot, but it's not that bad once you break it down day by day by day. And you just have to know, I don't need you to know the origins. I don't need you to know the insertions. I just need you to know what its isolated function is. If you want to learn the integrated function, it'll give you a deeper understanding. I love that. But we just need to know what the isolated function is. So for those of you who are interested in doing the flashcard assignment, what you can do, and let me know if you need this from me. If you don't have a printer at home, let me know and I will print this for you. But I will print out this list. This is every muscle that's in your textbook. And I will print it, and it'll print like this. It'll print 6 slides per thing, which will fit on your classic little like 4x6 flashcard. And so what you do is you just glue it onto one side, and then you flip over your flashcard to the other side, and you say like the name of the muscle. And you just put the name of the muscle on the other side. And so you're like, okay, posterior tibialis. And you're flipping through, you're like posterior tibialis. And you go concentrically accelerates, plantar flexion, and inversion. You flip the card over, and sure enough, plantar flexion, inversion. So you don't have to make flashcards, but I do recommend it. So I'm going to be sending that today. You can put that with all those definitions that I mentioned earlier. I will give you 5 hours of extra credit. You know, if you were absent for a day, it will literally wipe that day off of your record.
So it's only the flashcards, Brad, or is it?
Yeah, just the flashcards in this one. I mean, there's the extra credit assignment from last mod, you know, but that's not, we're not talking about that one today.
That's the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to do one 5 to 10 hour thingy every month. You know, I don't do a lot of extra credit. I do one every 6 weeks, you know. So this is the next one. Next month I'll have a different one for you. So oh my God, where's my brain?
I have a question. Brad, so you're going to have that printed available for us to use?
Yes.
Or how?
So,
I'm
yeah,
going to have to print it out, or how?
You don't have to. If you want, I can print it and I can get it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know not everybody has a printer. You know, it's 2021. Like there was like a time where everyone was like buying printers. And it's like, what? No, go to Kinko's. You know, yeah, I don't need you to like, you know, go get your own flash. You know, stop by Dollar Tree, pick up a flashcard
Yeah.
pack. You know, but yeah, I will. I will print them if you need them. If you have a printer at home and you want to do it, go for it. You know, um, but it's 10 pages, so uh just text me or let me know if you want. I'm assuming you want one. um I will print out a couple and then I'll have them down at Sochi for everybody to grab. So we're gonna
Great.
meet again next week, so we'll get them to you by then. And it's not that bad. All you gotta do, just cut them out, use scissors, glue stick, and then I actually have had people, what I've been told works really, really well, is to take it even one step farther. Um, this is, if you really want to get deep, they'll just take the picture all by itself and they'll place it there. And then they'll put like what the muscle does. So they'll say like concentrically accelerates this. So that's the picture and the muscle action, but it doesn't have a name. And then you have to reverse your brain. You have to go, oh, okay, well, what is it? And then you flip it over and that'll tell you, what muscle it is. So you can memorize it in both directions, right? What the action is tells you the muscle, or what the muscle is tells you the action. So anybody who wants twice as many of them so you can maybe make 2 sets of flashcards, let me know. We had somebody do that last time. So I will print for you guys all day. Now that I got the freaking printer working. God. And that's it, guys. That's today's lesson. Like I said, it gets a little dry. I know that kind of going through every one of those muscles individually gets a little dry. But hopefully you found it interesting and gave you some insights into your own posture. Because I feel like everybody's got a little ankle something. And yeah, any questions today, guys?
All good, Brad. Thank you.
All right, lady and gents, I'll let you guys out of here.